newly released government transcript indicates that President Gerald Ford, while a member of the Warren Commission 11 years ago, suspected that Lee Harvey Oswald may have been a secret undercover informer for the FBI. This 13-page document was thought to have been lost for the past decade. It was secured through the Freedom of Information Act. The transcript details how the Warren commissioners, including Ford, discussed rumors that Oswald may have been secretly working for the FBI. Ford voiced concern about Oswald's use of post office boxes, an informer-like activity in attempting to make contact with divergent factions of the Communist Party. Ford stated, quote, he, meaning Oswald, he was playing ball, writing letters to both elements of the Communist Party. I mean, he's playing ball with the Trotskyites and the others. This was a strange circumstance to me. Unquote. The final page of the newly discovered transcript indicates why it has never been made public before. At the end of the discussion, Commission member and former CIA Director Alan Dulles proclaims, quote, I think this record ought to be destroyed. Unquote. 11 years ago, the Warren Commission attempted to answer the questions raised by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. For the past 11 years, lawyer Mark Lane has challenged the findings of the Warren Commission. Mr. Lane is the author of Rush to Judgment and The Citizen's Dissent. He speaks here before a conference entitled The Central Intelligence Agency and World Peace, held on April 5, 1975, in New Haven, Connecticut, on the campus of Yale University. Mark Lane.
Perhaps you recall that day. It was in September 1964. The members of the Warren Commission, 6 of them formed a semicircle. In the middle of that was the Chief Justice, the Chairman, and the President, Lyndon Johnson, who appointed the Commission to its task. Earl Warren held the massive document in his hand. It was a tape-recorded, filmed document. People, reporters from all over the world watching it. And he handed it to Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson held it in his hand. Was absolutely silent for about 30 seconds, and it was very embarrassing with the film going through the camera, the tape going through recorders. He didn't say anything. Finally, an aide said, won't you say something, Mr. President? And Lyndon Johnson said, well, it's very heavy, which history may record as the finest short analysis of the Warren Commission report. When it was released, the New York Times referred to it as the most authoritative document, the greatest investigation of a crime in the annals of civilization. And it is true that the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted some 25,000 interviews and re-interviews. The Secret Service, 1,550 interviews. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Dallas Police and the Dallas Sheriffs, all pouring their information into the Warren Commission, some of which was published in the 1-volume report, more of which was published in the 26 volumes of evidence, and some of which has been locked away in the files of the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Department of State, Treasury Department, and other agencies since that time. Tens and tens of thousands of documents. That's Dealey Plaza. When the shots were fired in Dealey Plaza, there were a large number of people there. Yet with this massive investigation, the Commission failed to question 95% of the witnesses to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. They also were supposed to find out who killed Officer Tippit. They said Oswald did that, but they failed to question the majority of the important witnesses to the murder of Officer Tippit. They were supposed to find out something about the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby. And before I say anything else that's harsh about the Warren Commission, let me say at this stage that not every conclusion issued by the Warren report was invalid. There was one accurate conclusion, and that was their finding that Ruby killed Oswald. But as you may recall, that took place on network television and would have been difficult to deny. They were supposed to find out how it happened, however, and they failed to question 95% of the witnesses to the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby, and they failed to ask a single relevant question of Jack Ruby himself. Well, how do they fill up 26 volumes and tens of thousands of files? Volume 18 is an example. Publish in full the dental chart showing the condition of Jack Ruby's mother's teeth in the year 1938. I suggested to the Commission that would not have been a relevant document had it been charged that Ruby bit Oswald to death. But the FBI was too busy doing other things. Let's go back now to 1960, 3 years before the assassination of John Kennedy, and to a book written by Robert Kennedy, who had just before that time been counsel to a Senate committee investigating the role of the mafia in the United States and their effort to take over certain trade unions. Book written in 1960, The Enemy Within, page 84. I quote from one paragraph. By 1949, with the help of Brennan and others, Jimmy Hoffa had consolidated his position in the Michigan Teamsters. But outside his home state, he was still largely unknown. For him, the key to the entire Midwest was Chicago. He needed a powerful ally there, and he found his man in Paul Dorfman. Dorfman, our testimony showed, referring to testimony before the commission of which he was counsel, was a big operator, a major figure in the Chicago underworld, who also knew his way around in certain labor and political circles. A slight man with thinning red hair and an almost benign manner, Dorfman took over as head of the Chicago Waste Handlers Union in 1939 after its founder and secretary-treasurer and counsel was murdered. And then he goes on to talk about Dorfman's tie-ins with Al Capone and Longyear's Willman. And he traces, Robert Kennedy in 1960, traced the power of the mafia in the trade union movement in Chicago to the murder which occurred in 1939. It was the murder of Leon Cook, counsel for that organization. He was killed by John Martin, the president of that union. And that information was given to the Warren Commission. One of their 6 panels dealt with Jack Ruby's background. And the question given to the commission was Jack Ruby involved in that murder, of which Bobby Kennedy spoke 3 years before his brother's assassination? Is that an interesting question? Well, here we have the FBI report, published quite solemnly in the Commission's 26 volumes. Commission Exhibit 1235, I quote from the FBI report to the Commission, an extensive search of the records of Chicago Police Department did not reflect any reference to John Martin, Jack Ruby, or Jack Rubenstein, as he was then known, or to the murder of Leon Cook. Well, evidently the crime never took place. We found reference to it on the front page major headline of the Chicago Daily Tribune. Attorney shot Union Row, the whole story about how it happened, how Leon Cook was shot and died. Shot by John Martin. Turn to the jump page, and there they have 2 pictures of what the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago police considered to be the 2 most relevant persons involved. Leon E.R. Cook left, lawyer and former secretary of the Junk Handlers Union, who was shot while in his union offices, and Jack Rubenstein, present secretary, who was seized for questioning. But the Warren Commission never heard about it, because the FBI couldn't find any reference to this story. I think they relied upon the wrong agency to crack the case for them. This is Dealey Plaza, Texas. The presidential limousine moved northward, got in front of the book depository building, made a very sharp turn, slowed down almost to a stop as it made that turn, started to speed up. The first car. Here when the first shot was fired, here when the last shot was fired. Commission's conclusion, no credible evidence even suggests that any shots came from anywhere other than the 6th floor of the book depository building, where they concluded was Lee Harvey Oswald. Let's look at some of the evidence. 2/3 of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza, 2/3, said the shots came from there, from behind a wooden fence high up on a grassy knoll. Every single railroad employee of the Union Terminal Railroad on that railroad bridge who was questioned, said, I heard the shots, I looked in this direction, that's where the shots came from, and I saw puffs of white smoke come from behind the trees, behind the wooden fence, and dissipate into the air. Puffs of white smoke. That was told to the Warren Commission counsel by S.M. Holland, senior supervisor of the Union Terminal Railroad. The lawyers seemed very disconcerted. Holland said, you don't have to believe me if you don't like. Ask any of the other boys. A whole group of us were up there. We all saw the same thing. That was sufficient warning for the commission. They didn't call one of the other witnesses on the railroad bridge. When the president was shot, he was brought to the Parkland Hospital, where the doctors examined the wounds that he'd suffered. They examined, first of all, the wound in the president's throat. Every doctor at the Parkland Hospital who examined that wound, who talked to the media that day, said it was a small, neat wound of entrance. The president had been shot in the throat from the front The Zapruder film, which you will see, shows where the president was looking to the front and slightly to the right. Point number one. That was one shot. A bullet struck the president in the back. After he died at the Parkland Hospital, his body was shipped to the Bethesda Naval Hospital, where only military physicians were permitted to examine his body and perform the autopsy. There were two FBI agents present there, fortunately, during that time, Siebert and O'Neill, and they wrote a report which was classified and later declassified, apparently based upon our history of examining how that happened. It was declassified in error. In any event, this is what the Siebert-O'Neill report revealed, that the doctors who were performing the autopsy on the president's body in Bethesda found the wound in the president's back. First of all, they examined the clothing. In the jacket and in the shirt, there was a hole 6 inches below the shoulder, slightly to the right of the spinal column. And in the same place in the president's back was a hole. And they probed it with their finger and with an instrument and said the bullet had gone in but a very short distance and then stopped and was not present in the body. They could not figure out what happened to that bullet. And so a phone call was made to the doctors at the Parkland Hospital. They were asked if they had any explanation. The doctors there said after the president died, he was placed on the stretcher and external cardiac massage was administered to him. His body was struck roughly in the chest area with the hope that his heart would begin to beat again. It was unsuccessful. Shortly after that, a bullet was found on the stretcher. The doctors conducting the autopsy said, well, that explains it. If the bullet had entered a very short distance, it would misfire, or perhaps it was a dum-dum. In any event, it was probably dislodged as the president's body was subjected to external cardiac massage. That's the second bullet. A third bullet was fired. At least one bullet hit Governor Connolly. He suffered many wounds. We're dealing with absolute minimums to see if we can make the Warren Commission case stand up. But at least one bullet hit Governor Connolly. A fourth bullet was fired, but it missed the occupants of the limousine, struck the curb, left behind some metallic material in the curb, and either the bullet, portion of the bullet, or a portion of the curb splattered up, struck James Tague in the face, and his face began to bleed. It was a superficial injury, but other than Connolly severely injured, President Kennedy was killed. So far as we know, Tague was the only other person wounded in the firing in Dealey Plaza that day. That's four. A fifth bullet was fired, struck President Kennedy in the head. You'll be able to see the film of the effect of that bullet on the president's head. Perhaps you've seen that on television already. That was the shot that killed the president. 5 shots. Absolute minimum. 5 shots. Now, a weapon was found on the 6th floor of the book depository building. The officer who found it, Deputy Sheriff Seymour Weitzman, described it in detail in a sworn affidavit the next day as a German Mauser 30 caliber. Shortly after that, the FBI said Oswald had purchased an Italian Mannlicher Carcano caliber 6.5, so the Dallas police said that's what we found yesterday. So overnight, the weapon changed its nationality and its size. And it's not a very good weapon, the one they ended up with, the Italian Mannlicher Carcano. I talked about this case in Milano and Rome, and each time I mentioned that the Italian Mannlicher Carcano was the weapon which was utilized for this precision firing that day, the audience, particularly men in their 50s or more, burst into hysteria. And when I, the first time, said what was funny about that, one man got up and said, we always thought that the Mannlicher Carcano was the reason we lost World War II. In any event, the weapon was tested by the fastest rifleman east of the Mississippi for the FBI, Robert Frazier, worked the bolt, said to get the new round into the chambers required a minimum of 2.3 seconds without even aiming through the telescopic sight, to which you'd have to add another second. So an absolute minimum to work the bolt, this old rusty weapon, 2.3 seconds, absolute minimum. Now we have Governor Connolly examining the Zapruder film, the one that you'll see, saw it frame by frame. He said President Kennedy was struck at this frame, I was struck at this frame. He swore that he was absolutely sure. Mrs. Connolly, who was seated alongside of him, corroborated his testimony. If that is true, then Governor Connolly was struck 1.8 seconds after President Kennedy was struck, because the Zapruder film and the Muchmore film and the Nix film are all clocks. Once you know the speed of the film through the camera, Zapruder film 18.3 frames per second, it becomes a clock for the assassination. And therefore, when you say this frame or this frame, you can tell how far apart they are. 1.8 seconds. Now, with a weapon that requires 2.3 seconds as an absolute minimum for an interval period, that becomes very difficult. But the commission never bothered with that question at all, except to say Governor Connolly was probably wrong. He had a delayed reaction. He was just struck a glancing blow. The bullet entered his back, shattered his 4th and 5th ribs, caused the chest wall to explode in a huge, sucking, gaping hole, which almost cost his life. The Commission referred to that as a glancing blow, which he hardly noticed. Now we have problems for the Commission. The most serious problem for the Commission is provided by the films, some of which you'll see a little later. From the first shot to the last, the Commission conceded. Maximum period of time is 5.6 seconds. 5.6 seconds. You perceive the problem the Commission had? Okay. You can't get off 5 shots in 5.6 seconds with that weapon, and that weapon is how they're going to try to prove Oswald did it. They're stuck to the weapon. But the Commission started with the preconception, and they utilized the evidence, or distorted the evidence, to meet the preconception. I'll give you an example. When the Commission was formed, back on January 12, 1964, J. Lee Rankin, counsel for the Commission, held the first press conference, in which he explained to the media, published on the front page of the New York Times, 6-phase inquiry, headline, how the Commission was organized. Organized into 6 panels. All of the evidence which reached the Warren Commission would come through those 6 panels. What were they? Panel number 1, what did Lee Harvey Oswald do on November 22nd? Panel number 2, Oswald's background. 3, Oswald in the Soviet Union and Oswald in the Marine Corps. Sort of a strange juxtaposition for panel number 3. Panel number 4, how did Ruby kill Oswald? 5, Ruby's background, which we saw they did splendidly. And panel number 6, the effectiveness of the Secret Service that day in providing precautions. We thought we knew the answer to that one already. In any event, those were the 6 panels. And when I went before the Commission, I congratulated the Commission upon its development of an organization, table of organization. I said I thought those 6 panels were fine. I said, however, Chief Justice, I would have added maybe a 7th panel if I was conducting the investigation. And he said, really, what would you call it? And I said, I'd call it, Who Killed John Kennedy? Because the only evidence which could come before the Commission, based upon their table of organization, relative to the death of John Kennedy, was, through panel 1, what did Lee Harvey Oswald do on November 22nd? And there has never been a more public, open cover-up in the history of this country, because they said in advance what they were going to do, and they did it. Now let's see how they handled this evidence. See how they handled the evidence in light of the preconception. How many shots can be fired with that weapon in 5.6 seconds by one person? 3 is the maximum. Assuming the weapon is fully loaded, there's time for 2 interval periods, total of 3. You can't get 4 shots off, it takes too long. Based upon that information, the Commission concluded Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots. That's the most you can fire with the weapon. That's what he must have done. But then the question is, how do you explain all of the wounds and all of the known results of the bullet by the development of the magic bullet theory, which is central to the Commission's conclusion? This is the magic bullet theory. There's Lee Harvey Oswald. He's up there on the 6th floor of the book depository building with his trusty German-Italian Mannlicher Mauser 30 caliber .65. Here comes the president's limousine directly in front of the book depository building and almost stops as it makes its turn. At this point, Oswald can drop the weapon out of the window, confident that he'll injure someone. But does he even fire at that point? Oh, no. Being somewhat of a sport, he waits until the car speeds up. As it moves rapidly away, Oswald fires the first shot. The bullet strikes the president in the back of the neck, leaving behind a wound 6 inches below. It exits from his throat, leaving behind a small, neat wound of entrance as it does so. It hangs out there in midair for 1.8 seconds, until apparently it observes Governor Connolly seated directly in front. It then strikes Governor Connolly in the back, shatters the 4th and 5th ribs, exits from his chest wall, and makes a sharp right turn, fractures his right wrist, makes a U-turn, embeds itself in Governor Connolly's left thigh, where it remains until external cardiac massage is administered to President Kennedy, and then it falls out of his back onto his stretcher. Now, is it any wonder that the inventor of that miraculous bullet, Arlen Specter, who became elected District Attorney of Philadelphia based upon the development of that theory, has for 11 and a half years refused to debate with a single critic of the Warren Commission? He was invited to appear on the Geraldo Rivera program with us. He said he would not go on if I was there or Cyril Wecht was there or anybody was going to talk about the facts. And Rivera said, I'll tell you what we'll do. If you don't want to debate with them, we'll put them on first. They can say what they want, and then you will have the last 40 minutes all to yourself to say whatever you want. He said, I refuse to do that. I'm not going to get involved in that kind of a situation. But he accepted the Tom Snyder invitation. A full hour, no debate, no one asking any intelligent questions. No one there to ask any intelligent questions. And when the full story is told about the death of John Kennedy, what the media did in an effort to affect the thinking of the American people, we will then begin to unravel the role of the CIA disinformation section, about which we now have hard evidence for the first time regarding their specific role to issue false statements about the critics of the Warren Report and about the death of John F. Kennedy. The government was very active in this period, very active. There was not a single lecture. The material in the archives is now becoming more available. We're starting to see things we never saw before. There was not a single lecture which I gave on any college campus in this country or before any church group, during which there was not at least 2 members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation present, with tape recorders. Not one. It's all now available in the National Archives. That's what they were doing. This was part of the job. Now I'm going to talk about one other area, Jim Garrison, the single most maligned public official in this country regarding the death of John Kennedy. Garrison submitted evidence to the grand jury in New Orleans, and they indicted Clay Shaw. And this is what was presented to the jury. Garrison's theory that there was a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. Garrison's theory that Clay Shaw was part of that conspiracy, and Garrison's theory that Clay Shaw played a part in it, his motivation being that he was working for the Central Intelligence Agency, and that's the reason he played that part. The evidence was submitted to the jury. The only time an American jury has had an opportunity to examine the evidence regarding the death of John Kennedy. 26 volumes came into court in a wheelbarrow. I remember it very well. Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Fink, who conducted the autopsy for the government, testified. You see, the single bullet theory also relies upon the fact that the bullet which they have, Commission Exhibit 399, is responsible for all of the wounds. Lieutenant Colonel, an oral inspector to this day says that, still says it on television. Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Fink, the government's pathologist, was asked that question by Jim Garrison's assistant during the trial, and he said, it's impossible for the reason that there are more grains of metal still in Governor Connolly's wrist than are missing from that bullet. That bullet could not have done it. Now, you add to that, counsel for the commission's statement, Norman Redlick, assistant counsel to the Warren Commission, that if you say that the single bullet theory is not accurate, then we would concede there was a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. That's how central it becomes in the analysis of all of the evidence. And that's what Fink said, that that bullet could not have caused the wound suffered by Governor Connolly. Not the one in the wrist, certainly. The evidence was presented to the jury. The jury listened closely. And the jury concluded, number one, that there was a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy, the first American jury ever to hear the evidence, the only one and the only one to reach that conclusion. A historic moment which the press has not as yet, of course, reported. Conclusion number two, that the evidence showing Shaw's association with the assassination did not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Although every juror who I talked to, and I talked to them all with a form questionnaire, every single juror agreed that the 9 witnesses who swore that Oswald, David Ferry, and Clay Shaw were together in Clinton, Louisiana, and elsewhere, every juror said, I believe them absolutely, and I believe that Shaw committed perjury when he denied that he knew Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, so the jury acquits. Garrison's failure to prove an association between Shaw and the CIA being a central question in the minds of many of the jurors. Jury acquits. Garrison indicts Clay Shaw for perjury and denying that he knew Clay Shaw. There's no such thing, in my view, as an open and shut criminal case. But we have 9 witnesses believed by every single juror, and every single juror saying they believe Shaw had committed perjury. It was a strong case. And then, for the first time, the federal government moves in directly and openly. The federal judge in New Orleans issues an injunction forever prohibiting Jim Garrison forever from trying Clay Shaw. Never happened in the history of the country before. Unprecedented. That's the end of the case. That's the end of it all. Victor Marchetti, who you know who he is, and the position he achieved in the Central Intelligence Agency. At one of those meetings there, during the time of the Shaw trial, Marchetti said at a meeting with numbers of people, including Richard Helms, it was said, in essence, that Clay Shaw is ours. Can't let it be known, our relationship between Clay Shaw. We have to do what we can to help Shaw during the trial. What did they do? Isn't it about time some committee of Congress, since Victor Marchetti made that statement over a year ago, isn't it about time some committee of Congress invited Victor Marchetti to make that statement under oath and then to call in Richard Helms and ask him if he or others said that and ask them what the Central Intelligence Agency did to pervert the flow and course of justice in New Orleans? I think it's about time for that. So I want to say one thing really clearly now. I've been talking about this matter for about 11 and a half years. All over this country. The assassination of John Kennedy is not a spectator sport, and we're here today not just to look at material and get material, but to change the course of this country. And when we leave here, we have to do things. We haven't had a real election in this country which has been decided by ballots instead of bullets since John Kennedy's head was blown off in Dealey Plaza. Who became president after that? Lyndon Johnson, and then elected because John Kennedy was dead. And then Robert Kennedy was killed in the '68 campaign. And then when the polls showed that Nixon could not win because of the strong showing that Wallace, it appeared, would make according to the polls, he was removed. We haven't had an election where we have made the decision without interference of bullets since his head was blown off. And if that's the country we don't want to live in, we have to do something about it. We've never had the opportunity that we have now. Never. Watergate has brought about a change. And in the wake of Watergate, the Freedom of Information Act was signed, which says that documents that are in the public domain belong to us. No matter what the CIA or the FBI says, they belong to us. And that was passed by a strong vote of the House and the Senate. And it was vetoed by President Ford, who, as Congressman Ford, signed the Warren Commission report as a member of that commission. And I tell you, when the facts are disclosed, finally, one thing I believe will stand out with absolute clarity. The then Congressman Ford and now President Ford and the other 6 members of the Warren Commission, because they did not take the hard evidence available to them and make it available to those who had the authority to prosecute, that they are, all of them, accessories after the fact in the murder of John F. Kennedy. What can we do about it? We set up a committee called the Citizens Commission of Inquiry. Just about every responsible critic of the Warren Commission, everyone who's done hard research, and others who have been involved in peripheral areas. Start with Mark Raskin and Dick Barnett, the 2 co-directors of the Institute for Policy Studies. Bernard Fensterwald, former counsel for committees of the Senate. George O'Toole, former CIA agent who's written the book Assassination Tapes. Fletcher Prouty, and many, many others. Morton Halperin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Many people have banded together, and we formed an organization called the Citizens Commission of Inquiry. What we have done already is under the new Freedom of Information Act, because it was passed by an overwhelming vote over President Ford's veto, we have demanded all of the relevant material. And it's quite clear the CIA, the FBI, and the others are going to be dragging their feet. We're going to have to go into court and get that. We're working now with the American Civil Liberties Union and with Nader's Freedom of Information Group, as well as with Mort Halperin's Freedom of Information Group. We're confident we're going to get that material, number one. Secondly, we're going to analyze that material. I'm teaching law at the law school at the Catholic University of America, and the administration there has made it possible for us to have an internship program. 35 law students will be getting credit for going over that material this year as it comes out of the National Archives. That material, that work will be done, and that material is going to be made available to every relevant committee of Congress which has a responsibility to investigate any aspect of the cover-up by the CIA and by the FBI. But what you have to do is see to it that your congressperson and your senator understands that it is his or her responsibility to fight for such an investigation. There are petitions here, but that's not enough. If you think this is a matter which belongs on the agenda for the American people, you have to put it on the agenda for the American people. That means when Ford or any candidate for the nomination of his party comes, or her party comes to any place where you are, any college or any community, this question must be raised, and raised forcefully until we know where that candidate stands. Above all, it means forming committees in every relevant congressional district in this country where there's a congressperson from that district or a senator from that state who has any authority and any power. And if we do that together, then 1975, with the new Freedom of Information Act and the Citizens Commission of Inquiry, and above all, the work that you have to do, if we do that together, then I believe that this year we're going to crack the facts regarding the cover-up of the assassination of John Kennedy, the cover-up by the FBI, by the CIA, and the Warren Commission. And I believe that through an examination of the cover-up, we'll be able to follow those footsteps right back into the conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. That can only be done if we force the apparatus of government to work for us in the effort to secure the facts, rather than do what they have done for the last 11 and a half years, work in an effort to suppress the facts. That's pretty much up to you, however.
For more information about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, contact Citizens Commission of Inquiry, 103 2nd Street, Northeast, Washington, D.C., 2002. This program was produced at radio station WWUH in West Hartford, Connecticut.